Have you ever heard the saying, knowing is half the battle? Yep, that's good old G.I. Joe. That statement has always resonated with me when trying to talk innovation in lieu of traditional methods. It's a touchy conversation to ask someone to change from what works and has made them wildly successful for many years to something new and different. This becomes a delicate dance of empathy and information. The more you know, the better this conversation goes. Every product offering typically has some positives and negatives. There's no one thing that works for every application. Let's take a look at some traditional methods and discuss the pros and cons in an effort to have better communication with our contractor partners. Let's start with the most common traditional methods for joining copper tubing, talking about soft soldering, brazing, or sometimes referred to as welding. Although the methods are different, they're similar enough in their pros and cons to where we'll lump them together. Some of the pros are that it's inexpensive. It is not system specific. It's reliable when it's done correctly. It's available everywhere. This style of connection is not limited to temperature and pressure. And for the contractor, it is a pro that it takes trade skills and not everyone can do it. Some of the cons are fire. Connections are unachievable under wet conditions. You have mandatory ancillary items, things like flux, solder, brushes, etc. And it is very inconsistent with today's materials when it comes to zero lead fluxes and solders. The alternative in this space, ProPress copper. The same thing you talk about every single day. It is fast, reliable, consistent, it is safe, you can do it under wet conditions, it's a giant labor saver. There's no chemicals, no flames, and no leaks. In the same breath, we have to consider our own cons, things that you will hear from the contractor. It is expensive. My rebuttal is, what does your rework cost you? It is specific to the sealing element. So we have to be trained and we have to be sharper about what we're installing. Tight places, we have to think and fit differently. And lastly is the availability conversation, and that's where we come in as salespeople to make sure we have full inventories, approvals, and everything we need not to slow the contractor down on site. Let's take a look at threading as our next traditional method. Some of the pros are that it's inexpensive. It is not system specific. It's reliable when it's done correctly. It's available everywhere. This style of connection is not limited to temperature and pressure. And for the contractor, it is a pro that it takes trade skills and not everyone can do it. Some of the cons are that it requires heavy and expensive equipment requiring space on the job site. It requires oils or lubricants. Threads have to be set and checked to be the correct depth and taper. It weakens the integrity of the pipe, and it is prone to leakage. Next, let's take a look at welding as a traditional method. Some of the pros are that it's inexpensive. It is not system specific. It's reliable when it's done correctly. It's available everywhere. This style of connection is not limited to temperature and pressure. And for the contractor, it is a pro that it takes trade skills and not everyone can do it. Some of the cons to welding are, it requires expensive equipment, requires ancillary items such as rods, welding masks, gloves, wire brushes, etc., requires certification, requires firewatch, requires inspection, has higher labor rates, and is extremely labor intensive. And lastly here, let's take a look at a groove connection. Some of the pros are it's extremely reliable. There is a wide range of sizes. It can be assembled and disassembled without damaging the system. There is really good availability, and it's approved everywhere. Some of the cons are that it requires extremely expensive equipment to make. It requires calibration. It is labor intensive. It is expensive. It is susceptible to temperatures and pressures, and it is sealing element specific. Let's take a look at the pros and cons of MegaPress as an option to threading, welding, and grooving. The pros, first and foremost, we are faster, we are safer, and we are more reliable. We have good availability, great approvals, and fantastic warranties. Now, it wouldn't be right if we didn't look in the mirror at ourselves. Seeing through the contractor's lens is extremely important. So, the cons to MegaPress. It is expensive, both in the fittings and the tooling. There is a limited size range. It is susceptible to temperatures and pressures and is very sealing element specific. This is just a quick overview, but knowing this information helps us have educated, professional conversations with our contractor and engineer partners on where we fit, where we don't, and how Viga products can benefit their project. Okay, y'all, let's discuss.